Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio, an educational podcast looking at viewpoint diversity on every kind of issue, especially controversial issues. I started this podcast for two reasons, really. One is to talk to people that I would not normally be able to talk to get different perspectives on things. And the other one is to try and make an impact, make a dent in the more entrenched traditional educational models by modeling something better. And my guest today, I seem to find like the perfect people to cover different topics with. And my guest today is right along that vein. Matt Beaudreau has been in the efforts to try and challenge the traditional education system for a long time. He's established various schools through Acton Academy, the Apogee School with Tim Kennedy, who's a fairly well-known military guy and interesting human being, to say the least. And today I want to just talk about how do we do education better, and it's quite a Goliath to be up against, but my guess has done as well as you can do. I think to take on that Goliath. Matt, thank you so much for being here, man. I've been watching you on and communicating a little bit on social media, and I'm just like, the more I can talk and pick your brain about stuff and maybe bootstrap something using your models, the better. Thank you so much for being here, man.
No, honor is absolutely mine. And to be in the game for 17 years, which I know you have, and I love that question. How do we do it better? Because I've been in that game for just as long, maybe a little longer, and you rarely hear the educators say those words, or we'll say it and we'll use it in platitudes, but we don't actually take the steps to do something with it. And so that's kind of what's got us where we are. So, man, I appreciate you.
So yeah, there's a lot of I'd love to just pick your brain about, but one, just to introduce you to my audience, and I do have a fair amount of educators, of teachers, classroom teachers who listen to this regularly, and I never really fit in with a lot of teachers. I always felt like kind of a round peg in a bunch of square holes at teacher conferences and PDs and stuff like that. But there are some out there that see that there's potential to do something better. What's your background just in education and overall? How did you get to the point where now you're taking on building your own schools and stuff like that?
Very cool, man. I appreciate it. Yeah. So, and before I even just kind of give the background, since we do have teachers, we do have educators, we do have administrators who are listening. I'm going to be very, very specific about my background and why I say the things I say. What I want you to hear before I say all of this is, if you are a good human being who is working in a school and you are working for the betterment of young people, I am on your side. I am on your team. I am grateful for you. I am thankful for you. Because when I start talking about a system that I very, very much disagree with, and I say things like conveyor belt system is how I describe it. When I say those things, what ends up happening quite often are the teachers, the administrators, they take it as a personal attack on them. So if you're hearing this, please know that this is not a personal attack on you. I support you. I see the need for you. I want to help you. I'm right there with you. So I always want to preface it with that so people know where I'm coming from. So just a quick and kind of overall is, I always tell people I got 2 decades in education, but it starts when I was 4, because when I was 4, I realized that it was a game. I realized early on it was a game. I remember being separated. I started school early. I started kindergarten early. I remember being separated in that classroom. And I remember looking around the classroom, and we had been named groups of colors. And I remember looking around going, okay, well, those are the people they think need the most help with reading. Those are the people they think are next. And this is the table they think have it down the best. I figured it out at 4. And so then I figured out very early on, cool, well, then there's got to be a way to play this game to make the teachers like me and to make so I got straight A's all through school without learning the damn thing, because I understood the system. I figured out the game early. And that's a problem, that it's a game anyways, because I never went internal as a student and went, who am I? What am I meant to do? Right. I went, okay, who's the teacher? What do they want to hear? What do I need to do? How do I get my A doing the least amount of work possible? Is there value to that? Maybe, but is that what education should be for? I would argue that it's not, right? So I always take people back there first to let them know, like, I saw that game early. So my first actually foray into the profession of education was at Stanford University. And I was a corporate trainer there, which meant I got to work with everybody. I got to work with, everything from the sports teams to the students, to the parents, to the donors, to the professors, to the administration. I got to work with everybody and see the ins and outs, which includes admissions. And that's again where I was like, wait a second. Oh yeah, I remember, this whole thing's a game. And this isn't the meritocracy that people say that it is. There's a whole, everybody hears about Aunt Becky and the whole scandal, right? Of all of that. It's tip of the iceberg stuff, and it's very, very, that's peanuts compared to what actually happens a lot of times. So I saw that game and I went, man, naively, I went, okay, well, I'm going to try to help people by getting ahead of it. I like this whole standing up in front of all these people and talking thing. So maybe I should be a teacher, and that's where I can go back and change this game. So I end up being a public school teacher. I'm going, this isn't about the kids. So I'm going to be a public school administrator, because that's when I get to change the game. I got into that, and you go, wait, this is even less about the kids than I realized, right? All the politics and stuff that goes into it. So I was a public school administrator, naively left to go private school teacher, private school administrator. Most private schools, it's the same, same pig, different shade of lipstick. It's the same kind of conveyor belt system, which is ultimately why I left all of those to then start the schools that I start. And that whole journey in and of itself is a completely different life. And while I was building those schools, I was fortunate enough to be speaking to the top Fortune 500 companies in the world. They were paying me a lot of money to talk to them about how to help the young people that they were hiring, because they're going, hey, Harvard, Stanford, MIT, super smart, they suck. All they can do is play school. We want to fire all of them. Help us not want to fire them. And so I got to take that information back into the schools that I was building, to do something just vastly, vastly different. So, and now I've personally launched 3 schools, but I've helped people now launch campuses all over the world. And as a network, we have almost 300 campuses at this point, which is rad. So we're just going to keep on going.
Wow. Yeah, that has echoes of like John Taylor Gatto.
Yeah.
Like he's the best. I had Connor Boyack on the last episode I had.
Connor's a dear friend of mine, man.
Oh, okay. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, he was great. And he's just really inspired by that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Different kinds of school and stuff like that.
Connor's a dear friend. And so that's what I know Connor.
Awesome.
I know Connor very well. And that's part of the reason. So Connor's at one of our schools, his kids, and he's homeschooled forever.
Yeah.
But they very much support the schools. And that's where I am too. I'm like either homeschool or what we're building over here. Those are my, so Connor's kids are giving that a shot too, man. I talk to him a lot. He's a good dude.
Yeah. Like what you say, it seems like the metaphor I use a lot is like it's an obstacle course. Kids get really good at going through an obstacle course.
Yeah.
They're really good at compliance. But if you tell them to build an obstacle course, then they break. And I've had a similar thing. I've taught public school, I've taught charter, and I've taught private. And there's little things can change, and you get a little bit more freedom. But it's still the same idea, the same model, where you exchange the kids' curiosity that they have, and at a young age. I have a 5, a 7, and a 1-year-old, and they're so curious. And we're in regular school now, but we're going to pull them out soon. As soon as it starts to become, once they get the basic, arithmetic and basics of reading, then you got to pull them out, because then it just becomes, you got to jump through these hoops.
That's exactly it. And I love a few of the things that you said there. You said the word curious, right? And young people are curious. And if you look at adults, most adults that you and I know aren't curious anymore. We have all the answers, right? We don't talk about good questions anymore. We talk about, here's all the answers that I have from all of my wisdom, all my experience. And that just, that really kind of stops the growth process right there. I want to be forever curious. I want to know that I don't know a whole lot, and I want to ask good questions. I know good questions are infinitely better than good answers. And so I want to cultivate that with our young folks. And we're talking about that truly, to me, is some of the sneaky stuff people are worried about, rightfully so. Maybe the agendas that are coming in public school, and I understand that pushback. The thing that people don't get is the system itself is the antithesis to human growth. The system itself is meant to strip that curiosity, to reward obedience, blind obedience, and to really engage your mind really, really early on. And that, to me, is the most dangerous thing. Even so, to where what you just said, well, once they get the basics, then we'll pull them out. And I don't know if you believe this or not, but the reality is, the question I would ask is, do we even need school for those basics? My kids haven't gone to public school, and I never taught any of them to read. They all read wildly, wildly well, and they're intense about it and they love it, and they're in books for hours every day. All three, 11, 9, and 6. Never taught them to read. Never had them go to school to read. So how can they read?
Yeah.
Well, how do they walk? We never taught them how to do that either. Right. So we got this misconception that, well, school has to do this specific thing.
Mhm.
Reality is it's not true.
Yeah, I love you did a TED talk. It was a while ago. It was pre-facial hair that I
Yeah,
watched.
yeah, I've got a newer one that has the facial hair.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've got the 2021 one has facial hair.
Yes, yeah. The original one you talked about just like how we have this system. I guess this is when people say like what do you mean by conveyor belt system? It's something
Yeah.
along the lines of like the grade levels that in this grade you do this, in this grade you do this, and you do it this way, as if every kid is built the same, as if everyone learns the same at the same pace and things like that. And if you don't,
Right.
like you mentioned the colors, it's like, yeah, I think we had birds. It was like the Blue Jays, the Cardinals, and the Robins. You knew the Robins were slow and the Blue Jays were
Yeah.
smart. Like kids figure
Yeah.
that out right away. And then there's stigma, like, oh, I guess I'm one of the dumb kids. And then I guess that's not, I shouldn't lean into that. Or all those kinds of things are because it's made to be with these colossal numbers of kids, because a lot of parents seem to be very indifferent about their kids' education. So they just send them off to this institution and the institution
Right.
does what it needs to do to keep control. Would you say that that's the leading reason why we have the system that we have?
Oh, it's spot on accurate. So I mean, we have a system that was, and John Taylor Gatto, you mentioned him earlier. He's
Mhm.
much more eloquent in the way he explains this than I ever could. So I highly encourage parents and educators to read that. And educators should be asking themselves, why do I not hear of him as I'm going through and learning to be a teacher?
Mhm.
And the reason is because if you did, you likely wouldn't continue down that path. That's just the stark reality of it. Because when you understand that this is a Prussian model that was meant for the industrial revolution, and it's an industrialized model to get good workers that are blindly obedient, can follow directions really, really well, and don't question authority. Again, John's much more eloquent than I'll ever be on that. But when you understand that that's the case, then you go, wait a second, what happened to human development? What's going on? What's going on there? How do we unlock the uniqueness of our young people? And you mentioned that whole first grade, second grade, third grade, right? That's you're the widget this year you're this kind of widget, this year you're this kind of widget, and everybody is that exact same kind of widget. And then when they get done, we go, you can be anything you want, you're unique. And they're like, cool, I just did everything that everybody else was doing lockstep. And I ask parents to relate those experiences to the outside world, and you start to see that it's kind of silly. So people go, well, what grade are your kids in? All right, what grade are you in? Well, what do you mean, what grade am I in?
Yeah.
What grade level do your kids read at? What grade level do you read at? Do you read at a 37th grade level? Like what? That sounds ridiculous when we
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we've been trained to, if I say somebody reads at an 8th grade level and they're 7, that you go, ooh, like that's a thing, right? So when we start comparing it to ourselves, it's kind of silly. Like, do I make money at a 42-year-old level? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And if somebody else is 42 and they don't make the same amount of money, are they behind or am I ahead? What does the standard for that look like, right? You start to compare those things and you go, well, that's ridiculous. Yeah, if it's ridiculous for adults, it's probably ridiculous for kids too.
Yeah, but it's been so entrenched and so
Correct.
established for so long that the idea of anything new is very disrupting. It's very tricky.
That's right.
Homeschooling, I think the stigma is changing, especially post-COVID. I think that
It is.
now more people are like, oh, wait a second, because COVID forced you into the classroom with your kid because they were on the screen, and you're like, oh, that's what school is. Oh, this kind of sucks. And I think that
Right.
that's starting to open people's eyes up to it.
Hmm.
One of the things that the cliches is, well, if you homeschool your kid, they're not going to be socialized. I just had my birthday like 4 days ago.
Happy
I was
birthday.
thinking back. Thank you. I turned 40 years old. I was thinking back about this thing, and I go, you know what? School's starting earlier now, so my kids are already in school. I never had school on my birthday. It was August 31st. We were always out of school till after Labor Day. Now, I remember all through adolescence, I was like, oh, thank God that my birthday isn't during school. Why? Because where I grew up, there was something called birthday beatdowns, which is all of your friends and just random kids from the school find out your birthday. They would punch you as many times as how old you were. So when people say like you send your kids to homeschool, they're not going to get socialized. Like the among school and like learning how to interact with other individuals, you also get birthday beatdowns. So like we got to be careful about, is school, where you go to school,
Right.
is that really normal life? Or is it
That's
a
right.
lot of just terrible bullying nonsense, like where you're terrified because you have a pimple that people are going to make fun of you and all that kind of stuff. That's not the real world. That's not the way
That's
it works. But yet
no.
we just accepted that that's the way that school works. And I take a real issue with that.
As you should.
Yeah.
Again, it doesn't map out to reality. People, to expand upon that whole socialized thing, so, oh, the homeschool kids are weird. Okay, cool. I grew up going to public schools, conveyor belt schools. Um, did you not know a weird kid in your public school? You did. Of course you did. So yeah, if the parents are weird and the family is weird, and what is the definition of weird, right? but like if that's it, then yeah, they're going to be. It has nothing to do with the schooling part of it. Like that, the educational piece doesn't mean anything. And so again, what are you being socialized for? Who are you being socialized by? Do I really want my 11-year-old, 9-year-old, 6-year-old to have the voices that are speaking to their head primarily during their developmental years to be other 11, 9, and 6-year-olds that don't have any life experience, have no wisdom, may not have good homes, may be exposed to all kinds of things? Is that who I want to be the primary voices pouring into their minds all day to quote unquote socialize them? So like, what does that mean? What is the outcome you're wanting? And when parents, when I ask parents that question, it's usually the same kind of answer. I want them to be happy and independent and, be able to think and make friendships and all. Cool. So why do you have to send them to a system that, in comparison to any other system in our country, the closest comparison to it is prison?
Yeah.
It really is. That is the closest one. Like, you do what you're told when you're told to do it. You don't have a choice in what's going on. You don't have a voice. So because you don't have a voice, you create these little cliques that you have to hang out with, and then you bully other cliques so that you can get some sort of power, because you aren't given power. You eat what you're given. You get, like, it's most closely resembles that. And that's how you're going to, so parents, when you get older, if you want to get better at socializing, are you going to go spend some time in prison so you can see how it's the real world works? It's ridiculous. Again, none of it maps out, and that's, we live on a ranch here, and we sold some animals not too long ago, and this guy pulls up with his trailer to get the animals, and my 9-year-old went up to him and she's like, "Hey, nice to meet you." And she shook his hand, and I'm watching as I'm gathering some of the animals. I'm watching him, and he's kind of like, "Okay," and she's like, "Hey, so here's how this is going to work. Here's the bill of sale. If you could sign right here, I'm going to take a picture of it. That we'll keep that. We'll give you this, copyright here. It's going to be X amount of dollars. You can just, you can give the money directly to me." And when I got the animals to him, he goes, "What the hell was that?" Like, I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "This is what your daughter did." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's normal. That's just normal for them. Like, they interact with the world, adults included, all the time. So is that not socialized? Like, what does that look like? And the whole scary, you mentioned the word scary. You're right. Because schooling, conveyor belt schooling, based on percentages of people that have gone through that in our country, in my head, I look at it and go, this is the #1 religion in our country. And if you've ever talked to anybody that's tried to leave a religion or leave a cult, that is the scariest thing they've ever done, because their entire life is attached to that. And it's, even when they see, oh my gosh, I'm not in a good spot. If I leave, my parents, my friends, what everybody's going to be, people are going to shun me. People are going to be, and I've experienced that very thing. I left conveyor belt schools, and other teachers and administrators are like, "You pariah. How could you?"
Yeah.
It's a religion.
Yeah. Like, I guess that's what it is it takes a risk to try something new. Everyone's doing the same thing. It's, everyone's conforming. Excuse me. So it takes a risk to go, hey, there's this new school. You almost have to know, like, hey, did your kids go through it? Like, let me talk to your kids. Like, it's so scary to take that leap out and into something, because you could say, like, well, it could be worse. Yeah, it could. But I mean, that's risk taking, and you have to take those risks. And I think a lot of people are they look at their kids as something they don't want to take a risk with. So how much of building something new, when you were building new schools, which was probably a colossal undertaking, but how much of that is like, now I got to get essentially, good Yelp reviews. I
Yeah.
got to get like proof in the
Yeah.
pudding
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
because word of mouth is the way that you would really grow that. You don't want to,
Yeah.
like, it's very hard to get that first class, right?
Yeah, it's tough. So, to me, and I guess I don't know if this is, I think this would be a whole nother podcast episode, and it'd be a whole like philosophical deep dive into my own brain as to why I look at mass conformity as the biggest risk of all. So to me, building something new outside of what everybody else is doing that's clearly not working, that's helping us create a society that's incapable of civil discourse, a society that is filled with people who have, mental health problems and don't have a purpose, and they're not, excited about their life because there's mass conformity. Like, to me, how risky is that? So
Yeah.
going outside of that, to me, is not a risk, which is, maybe why it worked as well as it did. But you're talking about building something new. The irony is it's actually bringing back the old. And so, this whole public school, people forget, because we've all grown up in the midst of this experiment of conveyor belt schooling that has now been around for 150 or so years. Prior to that, that did not exist. And you go back and you read some of the literature from back then, and it's hard to argue that they were not educated. In fact, it's pretty easy to make a case that they're more well educated than the majority of our population today prior to conveyor belt schooling.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they had access and they were able to, were there some people that never had access to books and weren't able to become literate and all that? Of course, yes, there were. But those that had access to it, right? Because the reality is, people have always learned by doing and thinking. Since the dawn of time, you actually do something, you reflect on it, you think, you have good conversations, you challenge each other, you have civil discourse. And then once books became available, you dive into those books, you dive into those minds, you put yourself in the role of the protagonist, you think, you do all of these things, and it makes you an educated individual. Again, I ask parents, ask yourself this question: what should education be for? And ultimately, for me, I think it's sovereignty and freedom, and to be able to, to do the things that you want to do. So people have always been able to do that. Then we put conveyor belt schooling in place, and there's been a declination. I'm not saying school is the only culprit, but there's been a declination of a true education, throughout society. So what we're building wasn't new. We were actually returning to the old. So that's how I always explained it to families. And so I didn't look to convince anybody. I just went, look, here's what we're doing. Here's what school does. You choose. If this makes a ton of sense to you, awesome. Let's go. Because the stories start to tell themselves. Once the young heroes get in there and they start experiencing things, they start doing things, it changes them, it transforms the family. Then the stories start telling themselves. But the ultimate way to make sure it works is to not sell anybody on it, because if you can sell somebody on it and make them do a quick emotional change, the reality is fear still creeps in. They revert back. Oh, my kid's making 80 grand a year and he's 12, but what about algebra? Like, that's a real conversation I had. That's a real conversation I had. That's the religion of it right there.
Yeah.
My kid's making more than most adults. What about algebra, though? Because he's not doing it. Well, I can't help you.
I get again, I love the disclaimer that you put at the beginning about, because I think the vast majority of teachers, even the ones I've gotten to public scraps with over, whatever activism teaching, I believe that they really do mean well.
I agree.
But they're a part of this whole thing too. A lot of my colleagues get annoyed with me because I tell my students, every single day, every single thing that I'm talking about, you can raise your hand and say, Mr. Roosh, why are we learning this? How will this help me now and in the future? And if I can't answer that, I'm not doing my job. I think of teachers as translators, connecting the material to how it's going to benefit you directly in your life. And they say that they ask their teachers that, and their teachers don't give them answers. They're either like, don't ask that, or they blatantly say just like, to get you into college or something. But college is the same thing. Matt, the reason I started the podcast and my social media is to kind of backdoor my way into having some, an impact on the education system. And I was like, should I go back to school? Should I get a PhD or an EDD? No, because it's the same reason that you went into administration. You think that that's the way to change it kind of from the inside, but you're just going to be a product of more of that. So you have to
That's right.
break out, even as the individuals, to be
Correct.
willing to do that kind of stuff.
That's correct. Yeah. When, again, I went naively into the abyss thinking that that's how I was going to change it. But,
Yeah.
like Nietzsche says, you stare into the abyss long enough, it starts to stare back into you and you see what's going on there. I knew what I was going to have to become in order to play that game. And I just didn't want to play that game because my integrity was going to suffer. So, I could not agree with you more. It is not a system that is going to go away, and it's not a system that is going to be changed from the inside. The options are going to be, things like Acton, things like Prenda, things like people creating homeschool co-ops, things like, we have under Apogee, we have Educating Modern Day Heroes, a homeschool collective that we run. It's going to be programs like that that start creating something better where people then realize there are more options. And I did a little movie with Dennis Prager and Adam Carolla a couple years ago called No Safe Spaces, and we took just a microscopic dive into some of the things going on in higher ed. And again, it was a tip of the iceberg kind of thing, but I recommend people take a look and start to get a grip on what quote unquote higher education is all about, systemically speaking too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole different thing. I know
Yes, sir.
I'm at a private school now. It's a religious private school that allows me to teach the way that I have been wanting to teach, and it just wasn't a fit at the charters and the publics and stuff like that. So that's how I'm able to still be in the classroom as I do all this stuff, which I'm very grateful for.
That's awesome.
But one of the things I've talked about with the different people on the podcast is, people say the cliche thing, the platitudes of like teachers should get paid better than actors or athletes or
Yeah.
whatever it is. Well, no, because part of it is scale. There's an element of scale here. Teacher pay is an issue, but I think about like the jobs and careers in society that seem to pay better, seem to be able to be scalable. You can make an app that makes you look fat and bald, and that could sell $1 million for $1. But if you are a great nurse, you're a great firefighter, you're a great teacher, how do you scale that? That's one of the biggest questions that I've had for people. I really want to pick your brain on this, because let's just say, I don't think I am, but let's just say I am the best teacher in California, best classroom teacher. Okay.
Yeah.
What does that get me? Unless I write a book, unless I, do something along those lines that basically take me out of the classroom.
Yeah.
How do you grow as far as the financial? Because maybe the financial element is something that's keeping people out there, but how do you scale good teaching?
That's a really good question. So there's people that can scale, and that's an entrepreneurial question. There's people that are able to scale, and you look at any kind of coach, right? The online coaching business, you look at those kind of things, and there are people that are making a lot of money in online coaching businesses. So you can argue that they are scaling their teaching very, very well. Does that mean that they are a good teacher? It does not mean they're a good teacher. It doesn't mean they're not. Likewise, you've got teachers working in small private schools, everywhere, and they may be phenomenal teachers, right? So we got two different things here. One, it's how do you make sure you're a good teacher? But two, then how do you scale that? Well, you're not going to scale that in schools. So I mean, that's just the long and short of it, is you're not going to scale that in schools. So you've got to take a look at an option outside of your normal conveyor belt schooling system. So the beauty is there's a lot of options. So do you start your own school? That's a really, really hard road, but it's a really doable road now. And hard shouldn't be a deterrent. It just should be an understanding going in. It's still a very doable thing, and there's money to be made there. If you choose to operate it that way. So you can start your own school. There are teachers who are starting their own, homeschool co-ops, and charging less than a private school, salary. I don't know how much your school charges, but let's say your school charges, 10 grand a year, 12 grand a year.
It's a lot.
Okay, there you go. So let's say,
no more than that.
So even if you go, hey, I've got 20 students who really want me to pour into them, and they're each gonna just drop down to 5 grand a year, and I'm just gonna have 20 students, and they're gonna pay me 5 grand directly. Well, now you got a 6-figure salary just working with 20 individuals and helping them grow. We took the Apogee Strong umbrella, and we're trying to keep costs super, super, super low for parents. But for $800, parents can come in and that are home educating and have resources directly from us every single month, and have weekly Q&A, and have daily videos that are getting sent to them. And the reality is, if we can, that's something that we can scale, because we can send all that stuff out en masse. We can have Zoom meetings like this. I could realistically help 1,000 families. Well, if each one of them pays $800, well, shoot, that's not too bad, right? And so there's
Yeah.
a number of ways to scale it. It's just, you've got to take a look at that entrepreneurial aspect. What does it mean to be a good educator? And then how do I want to, like, what do I want my actual day-to-day to look like? And who does that mean I'm helping? Am I helping the young students directly? Am I helping the parents? Am I, like, who is my target? And because you can't make something for everybody. That's the surefire way to fail, right? So you figure out who exactly it is you want to help, how exactly you want to help them, then you look for your minimal viable audience in there.
Right. And that's a big problem with regular schools, because you're aiming for the center. You're going to lose the kids at the top and the ones at the bottom. One of the like Khan Academy or something, they scale it, but what it's missing is, I started this a couple of years ago, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, is I pass out around a calendar the first day of school, and every one of my students picks a day, and I have lunch with a different student every single day.
That's
So
awesome.
I sit down and have an hour-long lunch with them and just talk. Sometimes I'm just having a bad day to talk about stuff. Like,
Sure.
get to know them, and they get to know me, and it becomes this like, oh, this teacher actually cares, like actually like is interested, looking me in the eyes, like asking me personal questions. And then I get to know them. And then if they're into skating, and I can use that whenever they're off in class to be like, I'll just relate to skateboarding. Like,
Yeah.
it's a great thing, but you need that personal connection to be good in school. And when they say, like, let's pay teachers better, the problem is, teaching, in addition to being personal, is also a long game. Like, it's nice. I get students all the time telling me, who are 17 years old, 16 years old, Mr. Roos, you're my favorite teacher. Thank you. And I take that. But what's the big one is when I get a student that I taught who graduated in 2008,
Totally.
who's 30 years old and is like, you know
Totally.
what? I have a really good life. Even if it's not directly connected with me, the
Yeah.
goal of us, I mean, at least high school teachers, should be to have these people go out and live meaningful lives.
Yes,
and
sir.
and that's really hard to measure and quantify in like a pay scale.
It is hard to measure and quantify. Anything worth it is hard to measure and quantify,
Yeah.
right? You've got kids,
Yeah.
right? How do you measure how much you love your kids? You
Right.
can't. It's not even worth like, why even try to quantify and put a number on it? That's another thing that we've been, if something is easily measured, then it's probably not as important as you think it is. So it's, those things are almost impossible to quantify, and we spend a lot of time trying to quantify things that we don't need to. We should be focusing on those things that you just can't, and not being worried about that or wrapped up around that. Again, all of that, as soon as we start to go, well, how do we quantify the impact we had on somebody? How do we quantify how many students we've touched, and what does it mean to have a good life, and what is it? Those are great philosophical questions, and we should talk about those. We should argue about those. We should discuss those. We shouldn't try to quantify it, because that just gets us in the habit of wanting to quantify, and ultimately leads us back to, well, shit, let's go into road academia, because that's easier to quantify there, even though it has little impact on all of those greater things that we're talking about. So
Yeah.
good for you, man. No, I love to hear that. It is. It's the best. I had a student reach out to me earlier this week too, and she's like, look what I found from, and I think it's funny that you said 2008, because I'm pretty sure it was from 2008. She's like, look at this shirt that you signed, and I had said, like, Nyla is my homegirl or something. There's like a little inside joke, that we had. And she's like, look, I still have the shirt. And I'm like, dude, that's rad.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we're not looking to just like get them into a certain college, or they quantify it by like, what are your test scores, which is right back down that whole road.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So what I found, even when I taught in a really tough area of LA, Glassell Park, in 2011, 2012, it was really, really tough. And what I found was one of the biggest contributing factors for the kids who got out of it and did okay and did well was the element of community. Is they had a support network. And a lot of kids don't. I mean, even I'm at a school now, it's like a wealthy private school. And a lot of those kids, you think like, oh, well, they have everything they need, but they don't have everything they need. They have the stuff, but they might not see their dad for like a month because he's over in, Singapore or something like that on business. The importance of community. How do you bring community, the families, the whole environment into the school? Because when you talked about the way it's always been, that's the what now my mind's blanking, who's a Democracy in America, Alexis de Tocqueville.
Mm.
What he said, about the importance of community in America, and how school isn't in the Constitution. Should we have even a Department of Education? I don't know,
Yeah.
because it's supposed to be on a smaller scale. So how do
Mm-hmm.
you bring community into your schools, and how do you look at that as like the importance of bringing in the families and getting them involved, so it's not just take my kid for 8 hours a day and I'll get them back and maybe I'll ask them a question around the dinner table?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, the entire structure of what we build is in terms of our K through 12 schools is just vastly different. So first of all, we really try not to go over 200 students is a max. Like if I never went over about 150. Once we got a big enough wait list, then we just open another campus. And there's social reasons for that, right? You start to, I don't remember what the sociological study is, but you start to go over about 200 people in your immediate circle, and you start to lose the ability to know and have
Or like
relationships.
Dunbar's number.
Right? It might have been, yeah.
Yeah.
So we want to keep it to where everybody on campus legitimately knows everybody else on campus.
Yeah.
I loved walking through campus and seeing my 5-year-old, when he's going through and he's like, "Oh, what's up, Jet?" And Jet's like, "Oh, what's up, Loudon?" And Jet's 17, Loudon's 5, and they're fist bumping, because they know each other, they've worked together, they've done some things together, they see each other every day. It's very, very intimate. So that in and of itself, keeping those numbers small is huge. But the reality is, our entire structure is set up to where they are leading the day, they being the students. So they all have studios that are kind of their home studio. It's roughly the same age-ish, but there's still a little bit of a range. And they're developing contracts of how do we want to operate here? What is our kind of value system? What is our moral operating system? What is our character-based system? Like, what does that look like? What are we promising one another? And we actually have ceremony around that. We'll have signing ceremonies around that. Like, here's what I am agreeing to. Here are the promises that I'm agreeing to, right? Every studio has that. And every studio also understands if other studios come into their studio, the other people, whether they're older, younger, doesn't matter, they have to abide by their studio standards, right? Like, that's my sacred space. So there's this honor and these promises that are built there. And then the day is structured, in fact, where the olders always have jobs on campus. Everybody has a job on campus, at least one. But the olders, part of theirs is built into the younger. So they're going in and doing some direct instruction with the younger. They're going out and monitoring playground time, right? And so they're building relationships all day long, and they're connecting. With the beginning of the year, we'll actually do a Build the Tribe quest. So our quests are these big overarching collaborative projects that are like 5 or 6 weeks in length. The very first one we do every year is K through 12. All 150 students are doing this one big collaborative project to create something together. Is that a just crazy time? Of course it is. Does that build a crazy amount of respect, love, and a bond on that campus? It absolutely does. Right. And then when we'll have our exhibitions of work at the end of every quest throughout the year, those exhibitions are everybody is there. All of the families are invited. Like, it is a community event. Right. So every exhibition we have, we make a big deal out of it. And all the parents come and everybody's celebrating. We do parent contract signings. Like, there's just so much that we do, to not use the cliche of, no, we're all a family here. All schools say that, and it's a bunch of garbage.
Yeah.
We actually want to put that into practice.
I guess a big hurdle that I've seen in this too, is to get to your school,
Mm-hmm.
which sounds amazing, is you have to have parents that, part of my language, give a shit
Yep.
enough. And it's not even fair that they give a shit, I should say. It's that because they're just, it is, but it also isn't. Like, they might be busy, they might have a million things going on, working 2 jobs, single mom, whatever it is, but you have to get them to care about giving their kid another option. Like, do
That's
you
it.
do outreach? Is that what, like, why you do like the stuff you do on social media and stuff, is to get attention of parents, to get them to think? Because
Yeah.
like parent teacher conferences, when I was teaching in the hood, there
Yep.
were very lonely nights. And
Yep.
then now I'm at this very expensive private school, and there's a line out my door.
Yep.
So because the parents are like, hey, I want to send my kid to a good school. So
Yep.
a lot of parents don't think like that. How do you deal with that hurdle?
And a lot of parents don't understand what a good school is, right? Good
Yeah.
school is test scores. Well, all that
Right.
means
Yeah. It just has a
you're
reputation
in a
of
good
like they get you into
socioeconomic,
Harvard.
yeah,
Right.
you're in a good socioeconomic area. That's all it means.
Yeah.
So my whole goal isn't to say, hey, you should be in a good school and you should care, or hey, you should, like, that's never my goal. My goal is to, to use that matrix cliche, is to red pill people to understand what education should even be in the first place.
Yeah.
What does that mean, right? And so I'm just continuously giving sound bites and insights into what it looks like, so that people can go, oh my gosh, that makes a whole lot more sense. Because again, I don't want to sell somebody and convince somebody just because I have seen the benefits of it. I can get people, I always say I can walk people intellectually through the process and have them, by the time we're done, just go, oh my gosh, this makes a ton of sense. Yeah, this makes sense. But if they haven't crossed that emotional boundary on their own, where they're willing to detach from the conveyor belt system and get rid of all the associated baggage and garbage with that, then they're going to drop back to that when something comes up. Once their young person starts struggling on something, that's going to be like, oh my gosh, well, okay, the fear is setting in. We got to get back to what I know. And what I know, what I'm comfortable with. I'm comfortable with that, right? So it's not even about caring. It's about trusting their young person enough to educate. The reality is, I don't believe anybody can be educated. I think you can be led and you can be inspired, but education is ultimately up to you. It is a personal endeavor. And so that's why we don't even call our adults teachers. We call them guides. They're there to guide, they're there to inspire, they're there to question, they're there to make you think. They're there to make sure energy stays high and motivation stays high, and to keep putting obstacles in front of you, because when you overcome those obstacles, that's when you grow and you become self-confident and self-aware. And they're there for that. They're not there to educate. You're there to educate yourself.
Yeah.
I
No,
can
that's
only help
I
parents so much.
I teach now I'm just teaching part-time, but I teach a civics class that I wrote, and I say this is a think tank. I have a
Yep.
little bit more wisdom than you, perhaps because I'm older and I have this concentration area, but we're in this together. And if you have
Yeah.
issues with what I'm saying, then like you do that because you're sharpening my ideas as I'm sharpening yours. And it has that feel. And it's really awesome. I mean, you have to just check your ego a little bit at the door when a kid corrects you, to go
Just
like, no, you're wrong, to be like, oh, you're probably onto something. I must have
well,
been unclear at the very least.
yeah, that's awesome. And just have those, our guides don't even answer questions.
Mm,
They'll only answer things with
more
questions
questions.
back. Yeah, that's
Socratic
it.
method.
Answer questions, right? Because
Yeah.
we're not gonna go and assume all the answers. We're just gonna keep asking questions without worrying that they're gonna get to the quote unquote right answer,
That's
right?
well, that's exactly what I was on a podcast about education, controversial stuff. I bring up controversial stuff. I talk about race and gender and COVID stuff and all that kind of stuff that a lot of teachers shy away from. And they say,
Yep.
what do you do if a kid takes issue? I say I just ask them a lot of questions, because if you
Yeah.
take an issue over like what I'm saying about race or gender, whatever it is, I'm going to ask you questions. And what you start to reveal is that they're probably pretty ignorant, as we all are, about these things. Yet you have this really strong activist stance, but you don't know. And I think activism and education are kind of, they're opposing, because activism by definition means that you know the answer and you're trying to implement it out there. And
Mm.
education is like trying to find the answers.
Totally. And that's a good way to put it. And so what we do, with our young heroes, man, is every studio has what we call the rules of engagement. And rules of engagement are basically just kind of the boundaries, the quick set of, rules or laws or whatever around a good conversation, around civil discourse. And so what we tell them is, your goal is always to just make sure you're operating within those rules of engagement. Making sure that you're concise, making sure that you're listening to somebody else's complete thought before you go back and give an answer. Make sure that you're not repeating points, making sure that you're asking clarifying questions, making sure, right? You make sure that those things are in order. If those things are keeping emotion, sidelined, so that you can be as objective as humanly possible, right? When you start to have the rules of engagement in effect, and you start to make that the focus of a conversation, the content, once you get good at it, actually becomes irrelevant. You can engage in any kind of content, you can do it well, and you can get to the bottom of either clarifying your thoughts or hearing somebody else's thoughts and having them provide better evidence for you, where you go, okay,
Mhm.
maybe I'm going to go ahead and be, humble enough to go ahead and change my mind. And that's what an educated person would do. So the best, the whole George Floyd thing, when that all went down, the best conversation I heard, period, end of story, on that whole topic happened in a group of middle school students, because they were wildly opposed, but the way that they handled that was unbelievable, because they stuck to the rules of engagement. Some people changed their minds, some didn't, but the conversation was fantastic, and they all had a good understanding of what they actually believed when they left. Most people don't know why they believe what they believe.
Sounds like what you're doing is so aligned with the stuff that I have been doing for so long, and it seemed so strange. I knew it was right, but it seemed like strange in the system of like, you can't talk about that. You can't show. I showed like, let's show the dash cam videos of this. We talked about George Floyd in my class, and it was a tough one, but it was all about like, let's just figure this out. Let's just talk about whatever it is. Like some kids like, oh, well, he was on fentanyl. It's like, even if he was, is putting your knee on the neck of someone who's going through cardiac arrest the best way to serve and protect? Like there's all these different questions that you can go down to try and figure it out.
That's exactly it. And our role as educators, and I take this from the parenting standpoint too, we're so itchy to get our point across, as the adult in the room. Like, here, let me, our role really should be to push back on either side of an argument and not show our hand. Because if we want the real thinking to happen, if we're saying we really want kids to learn how to think, if we're really saying that, then they don't know. No students. People guess, but people always guess wrong. And I've had people guess all sides. No students know where I stand on any issue.
Yeah.
They don't know.
That's interesting. So yeah, I had that like for a lot of my career, people were like, oh, there's like a pool going on bets about like how you voted in the last election and stuff. But now I'm actually pretty open with it. But the reason I'm open with it is because it's malleable. Yeah. It's like, here's the way I think about this topic now, but I don't know. Yeah. And so I'm very open about my political stances and the reasons why, and that people disagree. I'm just like open to always changing it that way. And that was like a fairly new thing just a couple of years ago. Yeah. So I'm like, you can ask me any question. I'll be honest with you, because I will abandon my ideas for a better idea at any moment.
Of course, that's it. And that's, I mean, you should be able to do that. And it's interesting, what that concerns me the most out of all of it is that people want to automatically try to figure you out by putting you in that box, and what you're talking about is having certain questions being off limits. Well, that's just indicative of my thesis that it's, a religion, right? I mean, you don't question if you're in that religion, you don't question that religion. You don't take well to other people, and I know enough about most religions where I can ask a couple questions that I know for a fact those religions will not like me asking. And it's all of a sudden I'm the enemy just because I asked a question on it, and that's really kind of the way we look at it. And people like to do that, too. We hosted, I don't know if you know Jo Jorgensen.
Oh yeah.
Right. She was a libertarian candidate for president, right? So she contacted me and said, hey, I'd like to do my Northern California kind of tour event at one of my campuses. And she said, would you be open to that? I said, sure, come on, we'll do it here. And she's like, would you introduce me? I'm like, sure, that's awesome. Like, I don't know you, but like, good to get to know you. And that's cool. And I'm glad to do that. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And I'm all for it. So she came, I got to introduce her. She did the thing, and we went out to dinner afterwards, and super nice lady. At the event, I had people come up to me and they're like, hey, this is really interesting because I'm looking up your school now that we're here, since we're on this campus, and I'm looking at the way you give students ownership over this stuff and the way that they have a voice on this. So like, clearly you're a Democrat, but it's really weird because you're hosting the libertarian, candidate. And then I had other people come up to me and go, oh my gosh, I had no idea you were a libertarian. Like, this is really cool. Yeah. You're a libertarian, right? And then I had somebody come up to me and go, man, why are you hosting her? I see your beard, you're wearing a suit, and do you have a gun on you? I'm like, yeah, I have a 38 on me right now. Okay, so you're clearly a Republican. Right. All of them wanted to box me in, and I just wanted to tell all three of them, like, hey man, I don't even vote. But all of you are trying to put trying to put a label on it. So it's interesting that we try to, and it's, and it's us trying to make sense of our world around us and understanding it. I get that, but we got to be careful how much we close ourselves off to, again, going back to what we started, that curiosity, we got to be careful.
Yeah. So Matt, the problem is this is a podcast that's all about, cylinder radio. So the idea is like a cylinder, one side it's a circle, one side it's a rectangle, but it's actually very complex. the problem is everything you're saying, I completely agree with. One of the techniques that I like to try to apply to my classroom, apply to myself, I do it with guests when I can, especially when we're in agreement so much, is the concept of steel man arguments. Familiar with that? Like as opposed to a straw man. So a straw man argument is you hold up the worst arguments for the side that you oppose. So
Right.
pro-life, pro-choice. It's like, what about rape and incest, even though it's a very small fraction of it.
Sure.
So steel man would be, what are the best arguments? Like, it's why I tell like people who are more on the left, like listen to Ben Shapiro, because he gives you really good arguments that you have to contest, you have to fight, you have to work those out. What would you say are the best steel man arguments against starting your own school, for the traditional education system and things like that? What would you say is like the best arguments that against kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So so the first one that comes to mind, I guess, if I'm really going to define it, it's not necessarily against it is not necessarily against starting the kind of schools that I've been affiliated with starting, but it is definitely for kind of the current system as it is, and it goes to kind of the lower socioeconomic and maybe underserved population, and specifically, there are a lot of one of the epidemics that I also speak to in some of my work too is kind of the fatherless home epidemic, and even fathers that are home but are just piss poor leaders and not good examples of good human beings, and of course, yes, mothers too, and I get that, and I'm but the fatherless home epidemic is something that's near and dear to my heart. And so the reality is we've got a lot of young brilliant heroes that are coming out of homes like that, and the reality is the best human beings they are going to see are those teachers, are those administrators at school, and those are the people that are going to have the most positive influence in their life. And I would never want to take those people away from those influences at all. And so that's to me, I don't know how to solve both of those problems simultaneously, right? The downside of any kind of privatized ed is the fact that it costs money, and so we do things to try to drive our costs down. Our costs per students are down to like $1,500 per student per year, like the cost per student, right? So then you can do things with tuition to offset that. Now you can scholarship, and you can do some things. I've got a foundation now, a 501c3, where we can scholarship, and you can do some really cool things because of that. But the reality is we still need good humans working in that system for those young heroes that just will not be coming out of there. So they need some positive influences. That's the first one that comes to mind.
Just piggybacking on that, I think, I'm with you. Like the families, I taught a kid one time who was being like a real jerk, right? So I was like, all right, I'm going to call, this is after I was at a different school. So I went to this really tough school, and I was like, all right, I'm going to call your parents. And he was kind of just like, good luck. Turns out never met his dad. Mom was in prison for murder. He was in like an apartment, like a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment with like 7 of his cousins, grandparents. Like it was just this chaotic, crazy situation. No one's going to go and advocate for him to go to one of your great schools. So it's like, what do we do with them? We don't want to just forget about them. And then all the kids who have active parents go to these great schools. They have to go somewhere, but it is kind of like prison. It is kind of like, well, we have nowhere else to put them. Let's just put them here. But it's overcoming that hurdle of how do you get those kids who don't have an advocate at home to go to one of these great schools? That's a tricky hurdle.
It is a tricky hurdle, man. And again, it's a nuanced, and a multifaceted thing, because we're not just talking about school versus school. We're talking about, an entire culture. We're talking about a culture that in a lot of ways incentivizes mom and dad to break up. It incentivizes, the men to not take care of their kids. It incentivizes this delayed adulthood and this perpetual adolescence. And, so we're really in a rough spot. That my fear is, I think we're going to continue to perpetuate more of a division than anything else. My heart breaks for these young guys that have so much working against them. And then, we're creating these better alternatives, and that's phenomenal. And it's going to create this upward trajectory for so many people, because they're going to see what they're capable of. So my only hope is that we create enough of this where these people have good heart and good intentions, where they're would just create this wave of people that are wanting to help in ways that we haven't even thought of yet, in a world that doesn't even exist yet, and it's a tough one, man. It's something that I wrestle with quite a bit.
Yeah, and so I just have this like flood of ideas now because I have connections with people who are from those neighborhoods like Compton, Watts, whatever, that they do a lot of community outreach. So maybe going out there and anyway, I could
Yeah.
talk to you forever, Matt. Like
Yeah.
the last question I have would be like, where can people find a school like yours, whether it is yours or one like yours? Like, where can people find this? They're going to be interested. I just
Yeah.
know my audience. They're going to be interested. So, how do you find a school like yours? What's the process look like? And then where can people kind of follow you as well? Because I love the stuff that you're doing on social media. I think that's a great way to connect with people,
Thanks,
young and
man.
old. I mean, social media landscape is toxic, but the platforms can be used for great
That's
things.
Man, that's it. I've been able to, that's we try to keep it focused on just using it for moving things
Yeah.
forward, connecting with
Yeah.
good people, connecting with great ideas, and perpetuating those. That's it. Otherwise, yeah, I'm not going to sit and scroll, because, like you said, it's a toxic sort of deal.
Yeah.
So, to find the schools that I'm directly affiliated with, people would go to actonacademy.org, and that's ACTON Academy, and that's named after Lord Acton. He's famous for most famous, I guess, for saying power corrupts, absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely, and that speaks directly to the fact that we've got the entire thing is kind of a flat structure overall, including at our campuses. So if you go to actonacademy.org, you can put in there's actually a finder button there, and you can take a look and see if there is something near you. If there's not something near you and you're an interested parentpreneur, maybe you got some kids of your own and you're like, hey, we need to bring one of these to our community, then there's a process for that as well, where you can jump in and actually apply to jump in and start, and you have the support of the network around you to help you launch a program like this in your own community. We need more parentpreneurs that are willing to do that. So that's the best place for people to go. I like the organization Prenda has been very, if people haven't heard of that, PRENDA, and they've been very vocal. When I say vocal, the founder literally said at a conference that he didn't know some of us were at, look, we've pretty much stole everything from Acton Academy. But you know what? That's fine. It's a
Yeah.
flattering thing, and they're doing good things with it. They're doing it on a smaller scale. They have more locations, but each location only, I think they cap it at like 15, 20 young people at each location. But Prenda's doing a great job too, and I would take a look at them because they're just, it's another group pouring into heroes. So take a look at those. People can reach out to me directly at Matt@Apogee Strong. But I'm active probably more on Instagram than anything else at my name, at Matt Beaudreau. And our podcast had about 150 episodes, got ripped down, but we're able to start recovering those and getting those back up. But the Essential 11, and I had like 100 or so 5-star reviews, and so now all the reviews and all the episodes were gone, but we're able to, that's a whole nother story, but we're getting those back up. So the Essential 11 is a podcast where we talk to people a lot about these similar kind of things. So
Yeah, when you say people rip off your, like, you don't like, I started talking about these culture wars from like an educational standpoint, because when it was all kind of going down years ago, I was looking left, looking right, like who's talking about how this is infiltrating K through 12, and I didn't see anyone. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll do it. So it's like, if someone else would do it, I'd gladly just hitch my trailer to them. It's like someone is doing an awesome job to scale these great schools with these ideas all across the country. It's like, you're on my team. It's all good.
Totally, man, 100%.
Yeah.
That's where that network, the Acton network, it truly is that. It's a bunch of
Okay.
amazing parents and entrepreneurs who are like, look, let's just band together and do this. And you have sovereignty over how you want to do that in your community. There's some shared beliefs, and we share all the systems, and like everything is shared, all together. All the owners work together day in, day out to put these in our, in our communities, and help one another, build these out. So it's a great place for people who are interested in doing something about it.
Man, I really appreciate you being here, man. This is an encouraging conversation. It
Good,
really
man.
is. It's giving me a lot of ideas. It's like light bulbs going off over my head that I'll be
Good.
thinking about and talking about
I'm
a
glad,
lot.
man. I'm glad. And thank you for what you're doing, and shining a light on all these things that need to have good conversations behind them,
Yeah. All right, man. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Honored.
All right.